Welcome to this edition of Tour Confidential on Golf.com. I'm Jessica Marksbury, joined today in our New York City studio by Golf Magazine's Bastable, Connell Barrett, and Cameron Morfit via Skype. It's been 2 weeks since Team USA's devastating loss in the Ryder Cup, but the fallout continues. The PGA has actually decided to implement a task force to discuss the problem of why we just can't seem to get it done in the Ryder Cup. On that task force, reported to be Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Ray Floyd, among others. Conspicuously absent from that list, the last winning captain in this century, Paul Azinger. So Cameron, what are your thoughts on this? Is this task force enough to get us back in the mix in the Ryder Cup in 2016?
I look at the names that have been leaked so far on that task force, and I see a lot of the same old names. I'm not sure why repurposing the same old names and just calling it a task force is going to really be that effective. I do think that it's not that complicated. You've got a couple of really winning models to look at. One of them is, of course, the European Ryder Cup team. The other one is the U.S. President's Cup team, which has gone 8-1-1 over the last 10 years. That is in stark contrast to 2-8 over the last 10 years for the Ryder Cup team. So I just don't think it's that complicated. I would assume that Fred Couples and Paul Azinger are not on this list because they are being considered for captaincy positions. But I really think you've got to bring in Couples here. He's 3-0 in the last President's Cups, the last 3 President's Cups. So he obviously knows what he's doing. So somehow I got to believe he and Azinger are going to be brought into the mix.
Cameron, you make an interesting point. If Fred Couples and Paul Azinger are being considered as captains in 2016, why wouldn't they be on the task force right now? That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I think Cameron's onto something. Definitely with Zinger, there would be a big conflict of interest, obviously, if he was on that task force and then later named captain. That wouldn't look very good. Yeah, I agree with Cameron. I think we're overthinking this thing. I think the task force was probably sort of a knee-jerk reaction to all the public pressure the PGA of America has been feeling. I think it's a good idea. They've announced they're now going to push the naming of the captain until a little bit later in the process, so we don't have this like 2+ years of thinking and strategizing and talking about the captain. So they'll name him closer now to the Ryder Cup, which should, I think, alleviate a little bit of the pressure and hopefully get us back on the right tracks.
I think the task force is an overreaction. There might be a positive benefit from it if, from getting a bunch of pretty smart people in a room together, they do make some positive changes and say, hey, what has worked in the past and what actions can we take? But let's just look at the facts. The Ryder Cup is usually pretty competitive. This year, the U.S. was without their best player when he's healthy, Tiger Woods, without Dustin Johnson. And they had a captain who, Tom Watson, just didn't do a good job. So I think that explains the 5-point loss. And the task force is, like to Alan's point, knee-jerk, but maybe there'll be a plan with some real value going forward.
And going off of Cameron's point as well, this is what needed to happen. This is what the Europeans do all the time. They have this kind of collective arrangement where they're with each other for years going into each Ryder Cup. The guys that were at the bottom end on one coaching staff become the captains in later years. That seems to be what needs to happen for Team USA. I remember Paul Azinger said after the Ryder Cup that Corey Pavin didn't ask him for any advice until I think it was 2 weeks before he captained his own team. There seems to be a lot more communication that needs to happen within the ranks of Team USA.
Yeah, no doubt. There's clearly a disconnect between the players and between the PGA of America. You've got Ted Bishop, it sounds like, and this has been going on for years, basically it's his call. It's the PGA of America's president, sort of sits in a room, probably looks at the list of guys and says, let's go with Tom Watson this year. So Cameron mentioned this earlier, but I think, yeah, getting the PGA Tour involved, maybe talking to Fincham and some of those guys and figuring out their formula for the President's Cup has obviously worked. You know, it needs to be more open process, I think. Just talk to more people, which is task force, I guess, is the first step in the right direction.
If there's a model to look at, let's look at what the Europeans do every 2 years to kick our butts. And as Cameron Morfit once pointed out to me, the Euros bring in the up-and-coming rising stars and have them serve as sort of assistants at the Ryder Cups to get them used to the atmosphere and the vibe. Martin Kaymer did that before he ever played as a competitor. And you know, who's great in the Ryder Cup right now? Martin Kaymer.
Cameron, it seems as though they're not really thinking outside of the box much when they're making these appointments to this committee. I mean, Ricky Fowler's on the list, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of creativity in the other figures that have been named. What are your thoughts?
I would like to see some team coaches from other sports, from other parts of life, like maybe a Mike Krzyzewski or somebody like a Bill Parcells, or just maybe somebody from the business world, maybe a Jack Welch. I mean, they're not going to be able to like make the pairings, obviously, when it comes down to crunch time, but they can maybe help out a little bit with the team dynamic and the chemistry, because I think something is missing with the chemistry and the team dynamic in the U.S. Team room. I think there's also a real culture of losing, and maybe somebody like that from outside the sport who hasn't been steeped in that culture of losing could kind of help pull the U.S. out of this thing.
Well, one thing is clear, something's got to change. So hopefully in the next 2 years, we'll make some drastic changes and get back into this thing. So Cameron, Connell, Alan, thank you so much for your time and insight. Thank you all for joining us here on Tour Confidential on Golf.com. We'll see you right back here next week.